All right, everybody. This is Urza Master from the Digital Escape Podcast, and today we are visiting a recipe we discussed in an episode a while back. We were talking our favorite struggle meals and our favorite dishes, and one of mine was a spaghetti recipe that I make, and I make it with a couple of ingredients that are familiar: mild Italian sausage, pre-made pasta sauce, but I cook the sausage in beer. In this case, it's a Berry Weiss. Adds a little sweetness to the sausage. Now, I make it two different ways. I make it with ground sausage in this case, and I also make it with bratwurst or cased sausage. Either way works. If it's cased, I put it in the pan with the beer and essentially boil it and then cook it down in its own greases until it sort of fries and caramelizes. With the ground, we're going to start it in a little bit of oil with the ground meat, and then as it starts to kind of get to where it can be broken down as it cooks, we're going to add in the Berry Weiss on top. It's to sort of boil/cook it and preserve the sweetness, and then finally finish it off in the jar pasta sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we're getting started here again with just a little oil in the pan. And I like to get the pan started on the heat, but I don't get it hot, so when it hits it doesn't quite sizzle, but it is starting to get to warmth there. We've got our ground sausage here. I always get my sausage fresh at the meat counter. You could definitely do frozen. Oops. Fresh, they like to use a lot of plastic, so just be careful. Don't do what I did. And then, yeah, basically, I just kind of break this up with a wooden spoon or, whatever utensil you prefer. And then I like to make it so the chunks are small, but still big enough to be like, a good bite of meat when you get it in the sauce. And again, the oil's really just in there to sort of help get things started. It's not that this meat lacks, fat or anything to where you need lubrication to prevent it from burning. But I like it because it helps move it around when I'm trying to break it up early. And then, yeah, of course, the oil adds a little bit of flavor too. Now, I use grapeseed oil, but olive oil works just fine. Any kind of oil you want to use, really. I think olive oil and grapeseed oil just lend themselves well to tomato sauce. So, again, whatever your preference is. So, kind of get this loosened up a little bit. Again, it'll break down more as it cooks. And I just leave the spoon right on top. Now, as this starts to brown up a little bit, not quite all the way, I'll add in the beer. And then once that's kind of cooked down, and I do keep it on a pretty high temperature, just as it starts to sizzle and kind of get a little crispy, we'll add in the tomato sauce. So we're going to go ahead and let this sizzle up and go from there. Okay, now as you can see, it's cooking up pretty quick. Again, it's on high heat, so the bottom's starting to brown, the top is still raw, but it is breaking up into chunks a little easier. And as it continues to cook, part of it's probably always going to be a little bit on the pinker side, and you'll get some crispy parts. Again, that's intentional. You want a little texture in there, and as stuff really starts to caramelize, it'll bring out some of the sweetness. Now, this is personal preference. Now, I kind of adjust it as I go. I'm not a chef. I'm a home cook at best. But I just kind of go with what I know I like, because typically my family does not eat this. I'm the only one who does. They just prefer plain noodles and plain sauce. So now that we've got a little bit of browning to most of the meat, I add a little bit of red pepper flake. Now, I know this is mild Italian. You could get hot Italian. I just like the red pepper flakes for sort of the look. And it does add a little bit of spice. I love spicy food, but sometimes it just needs a little extra kick to give it an edge and to bring out some of that tomatoey flavor, I think. We got a pretty good brown on most of the meat here, so the key is you want it to be mostly brown before you add the beer. which is now. And then you just want to add it a little bit at a time. What I find is if you add too much at once, it tends to boil up foam, and it makes a mess, to be quite honest. But if you do just, a third of the beer at a crack, eventually you can get it all in there without getting too much foam. And then the goal here is just to reduce this down until it essentially caramelizes again. So it's completely uncovered, the whole time that it's in this. And then when I throw the pasta sauce in, once it's cooked down and the liquid's all gone, and the meat has a chance to absorb the flavor of the beer, then I'll throw the cover on and basically simmer it in the red sauce until noodles are done, garlic bread is done, and usually I'll have an extra pot of sauce for those who don't like the meat sauce. So we're going to let this cook down a little bit, and then we'll get to the next step with the red sauce here. Alright, so one major difference when you're doing the ground meat versus the cased meat, so if you're cooking brats or Italian sausage in brat form, is you don't really have to stir those as much. You just kind of let it boil, and then you poke the sausage so that the grease kind of drains out, because ultimately what the boiling does is it kind of takes the grease out of the meat. I don't drain it. You could if you wanted to make it healthier. But what I do is I cook it down until the grease kind of becomes its own caramelizing agent. And then you've got the flavor of the beer, the flavor of the meat, basically caramelizing what's left of the meat, which is actually infused with most of the flavor already there. And then the tomato sauce just adds a whole other level to it that kind of adds like layers of flavor. Alright, so we're coming close to time when this is going to be ready to add that tomato sauce, and you'll see the liquid in here is purely orange, so it's basically all grease. And then you just kind of keep stirring the meat around until eventually it starts to get to the meat and you can hear it kind of crackle. And when you start to move it around and you see bare pan and lots of bubbles and not a lot of liquid anymore, like it is right now, that's when you can start adding your tomato sauce in. Turn the heat down to just a real low simmer, and then just let that steep. And again, the whole idea here is to just immerse the whole batch of meat in the flavors, and then the tomato sauce will bring out everything else we want to taste. So you see that you can get a lot of bare pan. It's mostly just almost like cooking it in oil at this point, but it's cooking in its own sort of juices and grease. So we're going to go ahead at this point. It is just about ready. Want to get it just a little bit less in there. You can really hear it start to really crackle and sizzle. And that's how you know it's time to toss in your tomato sauce. Now, you want to make sure to turn the heat down before. And I go from high to like a 2. Not to low, but to definitely a 2. Just because you don't want the sauce to burn or boil. You just want it to have enough heat so that it sort of simmers, and then the flavor of the meat and the grease penetrates through the tomato sauce, and kind of everything commingles. Now, if you wanted to, you could kind of let this simmer for a long time, like hours. But you kind of get like with the grease and the tomato combining it almost browns out the color a little bit, which sounds a little gross, but it's just flavor. It adds to the flavor quite a bit. And again, what you're aiming for is a depth that just, mixing meat and sauce, you just don't get. And if you use hamburger, you're not going to get the same flavor. You've got to have the sausage. Now, with the cased sausage version, you can just cut that up and then pour sauce over top and do it like meatballs. You still get plenty of flavor that way, but if you cut it up and then recook it in the sauce, you do accomplish sort of the same thing we're going to get here, which is an infusion of flavor through the sauce. So once you get it stirred up a little bit, you're good to go ahead and cover it. And then you just turn it down to that low simmer, and that's it. All you have to do is wait for everything else to be done at this point, and when it is, top your noodles, and you are all set to go. If you have any questions on this recipe, or if you think it looks gross, or think it looks good, let me know. Let us know. Hit us up, digitалescapepod.com. Again, the Digital Escape Podcast is available on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and basically anywhere you can get it. And also here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you're interested in what we're doing and all the things we talk about. I am Urza Master, 1/3 of the Digital Escape Podcast. You can also check out my personal page here on YouTube over at Urza Master. I do a lot of cool stuff, usually put out daily content, and looking forward to seeing you all next time. Our new episode 41, just dropped today for Digital Escape Podcast, so head on over there and check us out. Have a great day.